I'm Frannie.
Hi, I'm Sara.
Hi, I'm Jeandre.
Hi, I'm Eilish.
Hi, I'm Ella.
Hi, I'm Kristin.
Hi, I'm Alex.
And today we're talking about misogyny versus misandry, which I am fully aware a lot of people actually didn't know that misandry was a word. And actually, I'm pretty damn sure. My dad actually said it to me, said when he types out misandry, spell check doesn't recognise it as a word, which I find very interesting. And actually it supports all the points I want to make about it. But so misogyny, I'm sure a lot of people would know the meaning of. But for those who don't, I've got the definition right here. Misogyny is the hatred of, contempt of, or prejudice against women or girls. It's actually, I did a bit of research about when it was like first sort of brought into circulation. And it says that the term sort of emerged in the 17th century in response to an anti-woman pamphlet written by an English fencing master named Joseph Swetnam. But it was written in 1615. And it was basically just like a pamphlet full of like sexist jokes, and it was aimed at like young men to read. One of the quotes that I found very interesting within it was, "Women are crooked by nature. And even the fairest woman has some filthiness in her."
Was this a pamphlet for fencers? Or was this just a fencing master who decided to become a dick?
Basically, the latter.
Okay.
For whatever reason, don't know.
I'm just imagining all these like young boys in fencing gear reading this misogynistic pamphlet about women.
I mean, I think we'd be interested to know, like, it was probably quite normal back then to be saying these sort of things. But there was, like, loads of, like, responses from women. And one that is quite famous is, like, an anonymously written feminist play called Swetnam the Woman Hater. And basically the character that was playing Swetnam was named Misogynos. So, like, I mean, I would love to watch that. Like, all this information I got from an article in the New York Times, which is basically called What Misogyny Looks Like. I would highly recommend reading it. It was from March 2019. I'll happily put the link in the description. But misandry, I did a bit of research on that. And so the definition of misandry is the dislike of, contempt of, or ingrained prejudice against men. And I think for me, the most interesting thing is people think it's kind of like the opposite side of the same coin to misogyny, that, you know, it's like the same thing but different. But what has become very evident to me is that the term misandry has come into circulation as a consequence for misogyny. It's not the same thing. And it's very important, in my opinion, that we put the question of, you know, what came first, the chicken or the egg? It was misogyny that came first, and then misandry, and look into why that is. I actually read this article where it was written by a lady called Jessica Eaton, and it's called "Making Misandry a Hate Crime Will Embolden Abusive Men," and she basically talks about how, like, misandry is quite a loosely used term, whereas misogyny, like, you hear it a lot more, but misandry is normally used like not for its like full purpose, so you're not necessarily
like as a response.
Yeah, and like it's not describing like a woman that hates men, it's more describing a woman that is refusing to be oppressed, basically. Like she's got quite a few like examples of that. I'd highly recommend reading it. Again, I can put the link in the description. But she wrote this article. She like sort of speculated about how much abuse she got, how many times she was called a misandrist, and she said that she started a kind of like campaign for men's mental health and everything. Like she could give us so many examples of things she's done for both genders, but also the amount of abuse she got from men for both. So she did stuff for men, got called a misandrist. She said, how can you talk about this? You're not a man. But then when she didn't talk about men and she talked about women, she was called a misandrist for completely neglecting men. He got like death threats from men. for being a misandrist. She got told that she's going to get raped because she's a misandrist, like she deserves to get raped. And then some other man basically said, you're too ugly to get raped, no one would want to. And all this stuff, you know, you're clearly a man-hating bitch. Like, do you know, all this stuff just for speaking out about the word misandry. But what I will say, and this shocked me more than anything, dictionary.com, that is where I decided to get my definitions from. I searched misogyny, and there's like a little section underneath the definition, like where the origin is, like was from, blah blah blah. And they've got a little section which is words related to. So under words related to misogyny, we have sexism, prejudice, discrimination, objectification, and chauvinism. But words related to misandry, we have doubt, distrust, pessimism, bitterness, sarcasm. And I just think, to me, the words related to misogyny on this dictionary.com site are pretty factual. Like, you know, if you're a misogynist, you are sexist, you are prejudiced, you do discriminate, you know, you are a chauvinist. If you're a misandrist, according to this website, we're just bitter ladies, you know, just like angry with the world, angry at men, so we're just bitter. Yeah, I'd like to know what you guys think about that. That was my little bit of research.
Well, I'm very, very impressed, first of all. And I've definitely learned a few things. I don't have a point off the top of my head. I just wanted to say I was really impressed.
Thanks.
I was gonna say there's always throughout different types of repression. There's always this way of trying to turn the guilt against the oppressors and make them feel guilty for something, where there's a difference between the systemicness of like misogyny compared to what they want to think misandry is, whereas like it's a systemic discrimination against women. That is what I personally view like misogyny as, whereas misandry, misandry is a word that's used, that men want to use as when women are being discriminatory towards men. Now, people can be discriminatory against men. Like, it's not an impossible thing, but it's not on a systemic level. It's not used to ruin men's life. Like, it's not used to, sorry, that's not the right phrase. It's in a job-based level, at a law-based level, at a standing in society level, it doesn't ruin men's life. It may ruin individual people's like morality across their friends and stuff, but it doesn't change their life prospects of the way that women's lives have been affected throughout history. And that's always the difference between something that's on a systemic level of oppression and something that's on a discriminatory, like prejudiced level. Because like as a queer person, I've been prejudiced towards probably like straight men, but I can do nothing to ruin their lives, and I wouldn't want to do anything to ruin their lives. I don't want to, but it doesn't mean that I don't have this bias against people, like against that. That's just a stupid example, like on that level.
I mean, I think that's really interesting because, you know, there's obviously the argument, if we take it away from sexism a second and put it towards racism, people say, you know, you can't be racist to white people.
I was going to bring this up with the Black Lives Matter versus Blue Lives Matter bullshit. The idea that one thing only arrived because the other thing clearly wasn't proving a point to some idiots.
But she also says, I'm gonna have to find it. It's the ultimate example of whataboutery, when a group of people cries, but what about X, to distract the attention from the legitimate discussion of why. And I think that is like, it is really important. Like the X people are like, oh, we're talking about why, but what about us as the X people? Do you know, like we struggle too, which we're not saying you're not, but the legitimate and important discussion right now is about why. So I think that's very, very true.
Did you call that whataboutery?
I didn't. Jessica Eaton did.
I mean, that's a fantastic word to start off with.
But she also she goes, some people even ask the question, does misandry exist? This is not because we believe that men are not harmed, that men cannot be abused, and that men cannot be oppressed, but because misandry seems to be thrown around, generally at women, with some pretty tenuous things that definitely are not hatred or hostility to men. I think that also like links to your
I
point.
think something interesting is like how the term misogyny has been around for so long, and like kind of off people's points earlier that now the misandry is like, oh, let's just put a word in for the opposite of that, whereas because misogyny has been around for so long, like linking to Jeandre's point, is that it is within the system, whereas I mean, not to say that there isn't cases, like as you said, Sarah, there isn't cases of women hating men, there is obviously, but I think it's just at what depth, and in history how it's been changed into just a hate for women can also lead to prejudice against women, discriminated against women. Just hating them is different to having actions that affect them and their lives.
As I forgot to mention, because I did research the origin of misandry, that is found as far back as the 19th century. The first thing that they found was the 1871 use in the Spectator magazine. So if you think about the fact that the misogyny was first noted in, was it 1615? And this is 1871, that's over 200 years difference.
Yeah, that's a clear difference, isn't it? Like, so clearly things must have happened in order for the word to have been created,
It almost annoys me, having done a lot of reading as well, how many women are called misandrous just for like sticking up for their rights. Whereas if a man was to stick up for your rights, none of us would jump and say you're a misogynist. Do you know what I mean? Which I think is like kind of the point we're trying to make.
It's funny. I didn't really know what this word meant before I started learning about it before this call, and I would say that the equivalent that my guy friends in my age group and the males in my family, and if you're watching this, yes, I'm pointing to you, they would use the word feminist, thinking that it was an insult.
Yeah.
And feminazi. And what's the word? Misandry?
Yeah, misandrist.
They would use the word feminist or feminazi, but in their head, and when I'm talking about certain people specifically here, I'm not talking about everyone, but to them, when they say, oh God, did you go to that feminist thing again? Or like, oh my God, you're such a feminist. Activist is also a word that they used, meaning it to be degrading and meaning it to spark rage or anger in me. And I feel like they meant it as you are a misandrist. Words struggle, but yeah, no, that it pissed me off at a certain time. But I learned to not humor the boyish ways of trying to piss me off, and I got over it. But I would say that shit still continues today. But sometimes I talk to that person or those people, and they still use that word, intending it to be offensive or spark anger, and that really bothers me.
I think as well, like the fact that is a thing explains pretty well why some men won't identify as feminists, because there are a lot of men and boys out there that do want the same thing as us, but they, like my dad, right, again going to my dad, he said to me, why are you called feminists? Why are you not called equalists if what you're fighting for is equality between the two genders? And I'm trying to say, like, it's about the history behind it. The word came from, women being oppressed. And he said, yeah, but why does that matter if you're looking for the future? Because the future is, what you're looking for is equal rights. And I'm like, but you can't get to that point without looking back. Because without looking back and identifying what went wrong in the past, it's like, why do we learn about history in school? So that World War II and World War I don't happen again. All those sort of things.
Like, they are happening again, just FYI, like.
Eek. I think that's why it was so important that we did start the channel with like breaking down the negative connotations of a feminist, because there are so many.
I think it's like a matter of reclaiming some of the words in some ways, because at the deepest level though, I feel like a lot of these words are not misogyny, but like misandry and that kind of thing come from a place of the way society pits people to get against each other. It happens throughout society of all oppression that we want people to hate. Like hate each other. There's like 1% almost that wants the majority to find ways of not agreeing with each other and not working with each other. Otherwise, they pose a threat to what they think is the right way of society. And in this case, it's like this heterosexual men leading over women kind of thing. And it comes right from both like in the Bible, like people use the Bible to perpetrate that, but it's also in my socialist world, that's capitalism as well. But it is like, okay, so now people have found the word misandry, and now normal working people have used that misandry to go against women, even though actually everything that feminism does is work for men and women in the same way that, like, yeah, it's just this conquer and divide method.
No, definitely. Like, I remember talking to someone like a while ago, and like talking about some sort of feminist movement, like we're watching a video or something, and he was just like, oh, it seems really silly, like it's just all like really like feminine, like, you know, like all trying to just like say like that men are doing everything wrong. And he was completely on the side that like feminists was some sort of Nazi movement, you know. And I was trying to explain, like, no, it's like an equal. It's like, well, why is it called feminism? And, you know, it's that same point you made, Sarah, like, why is it called feminism if it's not called equalism? It seems really stupid, you know. But it was like, trying to explain was like, it seems so difficult. It's like trying to, like, you know, justify myself, like, well, no, it's called feminism, you know, because of the, like you say, the history and like everything that's happened. But like trying to explain myself and trying to justify myself felt really like weird, like trying to justify that I want equal rights, you know, and that still happens. And it's just, yeah. Just quite.
I think it really, really sucks that the name is such an issue for a lot of guys. And I think it links back to the fragile masculinity thing, where they don't want to be seen as like a woman lover and a feminine person. And, you know, it just like really, really annoys me.
Yeah, I think it's important to also recognize that it's not necessarily a blame game here. Like, we're not saying, you know, it's your fault as a man, like fix up. I mean, fix up, but it's not like, you know, we completely understand that it's like you're kind of like groomed by society and like generational expectations of what a man should be. But I think that's why these conversations are really important. And maybe it's a perfectly human reaction, the whataboutery, to be like, what about me? But I think in situations like this, it's very important to maybe put your needs aside and listen first. I mean, I think that applies to all these sort of movements. And I think it was made very clear during the Black Lives Matter movement, you know, the other side of them going, oh, what about me? So I think
that like a lot of guys feel like, because in terms of like us in like first world countries, like, you know, women aren't oppressed anywhere near as much as we, you know, have been before. And I'd say we're, you know, treated fairly equally to men in, you know, a lot of aspects. Like, you know, it's not like we walk into a room and like there's like so many things we just can't do, it's obvious because we're women type thing. Like, it's everyone's kind of getting a bit more like aware that obviously they can't really be sexist, so it's becoming more hidden to us. But I think that's why like we still get like, you know, a bad rep that as being feminist, because it's kind of like, you know, why are you still kind of complaining? Like, you know, things are a lot more better. And, you know, like guy friends that I have, they'll kind of like pick out that point that like they don't, because they've done nothing personally to any women, because they're not in positions of power, that they feel like attacked, and it frustrates men that way. But it's like they're not aware of so many like underlying sexist things that like they do that they don't even necessarily mean in a bad way, but it's so in our culture that it actually still is. And it's only like women can really be like, no, this actually is an issue, like this bothers us type thing. And
backing off from that, sometimes it's not just words, it's looks. Like as a dancer, I often have to walk around in leggings or, you know, tight fitting clothing, because that's what I have to wear. And walking from one place to another in dance wear or in leggings, like you see the head tilts of the drivers, and even that you're like, whoa. And I have a friend who didn't even realise, and we were walking down the street and I was like, great God, this really, really does me in when this happens. She was like, what? And I was like, did you not just see that row of cars of men in their little vans or whatever, you know? just glancing the other way, and like it's so annoying because you're just walking down the street, you feel like, oh god, am I always constantly on this pedestal for people to observe me and objectify me?
The
And
male gaze.
yeah, and I think it's so important to just like understand that that is something that happens that a man kind of doesn't often see.
Honestly.
And it's like some of us are brought up like throughout through generations. Now we're at a point where even more men call us like misandrous for calling something out, but it's just because we've been taught, like now we're coming into an age where we are actually allowed to talk out, like we have more rights, we can comfortably say something without being the fear of being executed or being called a witch.
No, I was just gonna say, like, I think it is still, like, even if, you know, a guy is completely innocent, I think it is still a man's responsibility to you know, if like you're walking down the street and like late at night type thing, or just like, you know, somewhere it's a bit more quiet, like I definitely think it is the responsibility to make the woman feel as safe as she can, like, you know, cross the road, like don't walk fast and try and overtake her type thing like that, you know, because when you're walking and you see their shadow and you're like, shit, what's happening? Like I think it, and you know, and just like being aware of like how you look at them as well, because like, yeah, it definitely, people can think that they're not bad because they don't actually say anything out loud.
That's a really good point. And also like my best friend, she was at uni for like, I think she quit after the first year, bless her, but she was trying to be a paramedic, and she was on placement for a lot of the year, and she did hate it. She said it was long hours, and she just said she didn't feel like she got much respect, and she said one time she actually was treating a man in the back of the ambulance and with a co-worker, with another paramedic, and once they'd got the man to hospital, the other paramedic said, did you not pay any attention to what he was doing? And my friend went, what? And she went, he was literally like staring at your butt the whole time. And she's like, what? And she's like, she felt so helpless because she's like, I'm literally obligated to treat him, make sure he stays alive, like I can't. And I think this is why it's like so important that when you can talk about it, we do, because she was in a position where she probably actually wasn't supposed to bring it up. Like she probably couldn't have said to a man who's needing medical attention, like, stop staring at my ass. Like I think like we're at this point now, like we're not in a position where we can't, like on this Zoom, so I think it's very important that we, you know, are talking about it.
At any point that like that women are standing out more, or like kind of like presenting themselves more confidently, like I don't know, like doing what they want to do, but showing very confidently. Don't know how to explain it, but I feel like men, not generally, but like some men find it quite intimidating, like, you know, like kind of, I don't know, wear something, no, that's not typically something that maybe a woman would wear, or not something that, like, you know, in a heterosexual, you know, in our heterosexual society, that like, you know, women are supposed to be, you know, gender role quite kind of passive, and, you know, kind of not kind of noticeable, but yet noticeable. But I feel like when women do something like that's not in that kind of gender role, then the men are like, well, that's just intimidating and weird, you know, and that's when like men, I feel like, lash out more as well and say, well, that's just weird, what are you doing, as well, and like that's more of like I think they find that quite intimidating sometimes.
I think it's interesting as well, like saying all this, because all of this is an example of misogynistic behaviour, and I think that I think a man would be shocked to realise that that is, you know, like everything about what we've said, like that we don't like, is misogynistic behaviour, things that make us uncomfortable and things like that. And I think if you were to say, like, you know, you're acting like a misogynist, I think a man would be like, what? Like, I'm like, well, hold on a second, like, you know, what it is, it's like, it's not necessarily that you hate women, but you know, you're acting negatively, you're having a negative effect, and it feeds into people that are misogynists, and it kind of allows them to get away with the more hardcore misogyny. Yeah,
I think what's really about today, what I feel like I've learned so much, and it's kind of made me aware of the lack of education that I have on these topics myself, and because of that, I'm aware that the lack of education men have on these topics, and the lack of awareness, like, around how they like approach women, or like how they treat other individuals, and how this can affect how someone feels, and like yeah, there's just no education on it. Like even myself, like I know in my first year of uni, one of the first questions that were asked were like, are you a feminist? And I think like 2 people put their hands up, and I didn't put my hand up because I didn't think I was a feminist. I was uneducated. I genuinely was just ignorant. And I remember like one of the last lectures in our 3rd year was the same question, and like literally everyone put their hands up, like boys and girls, because we'd educated ourselves so much on these topics and there was awareness around that. So I think what's really important about this chat and everything that we're doing is education, and just awareness on these topics is so important.
I think that's a very good point, and I think the whole point of why I actually found it really interesting when I did the poll on the Instagram page. I was like, who wants men involved? The only person to vote no was my boyfriend, and he did it out of spite. Everyone else voted yes. And I think it's really important that we do get men involved at this point, and especially like in reaction to our videos, like if they hear what we have to say first and then tell us how they felt listening, because I think it's important for them to talk about their experiences as well, because no side is innocent. Both sides are guilty for something. But that is actually pretty much what feminism is about. It's about discussing your experiences and working out a way to be equal.
Yeah, I think definitely having men on here would be interesting, because I think the only way we're gonna like get anywhere is together, and it's about bringing each other and our experiences together, and you know, working our way up together. I think Ella mentioned that in the first video we did, but yeah, it really kind of stuck with me.
I think just the more awareness that like men have of how of like so many different things that like behaviours that like are so natural to them that like does actually bother women, the more that men are aware of that and like kind of that becomes more part of our culture, they'll definitely you know, change that over time. Like yeah, I know that a lot of the guys that like I'm friends with here on this campus and stuff, like yeah, I'd consider them feminists, they consider themselves feminists, and like they're aware of like certain things, and like they call out other guys, to be fair, for like issues that most guys don't really address or like think that aren't you know, that big of a deal type thing.
I really respect that.
Yeah, it is. It's actually refreshing, like coming here and having slightly more faith in men now than I have before. Still a long way to go, and there's still a lot of people here who obviously, you know, don't feel the same way as we all do. But yeah, the more that women kind of like push on men of this is what we don't like type thing, and hopefully they'll just finally respect our wishes instead of kind of arguing back and say it's a compliment, take it. It's like, no, just I said no, so like respect that.
I think as well, like when a man calls out another man, the reason I have so much respect for it, because I think it's actually really difficult for them to do. I think almost as if like a bystander, if you're bystanding watching someone getting bullied or abused or beat up, you're just as bad for not doing anything and for not saying anything. And they've always, I mean, I was taught that the whole way through school, that if you're a bystander for someone being bullied, you know, you're pretty much playing a massive role in...
You remember the assembly? I remember the assembly.
I remember the assembly in primary school, and I've always thought that with, you know, men that don't say stuff. And I said, like, you might have never done something yourself, but if you are sat next to a man who's literally talking about pretty much, you know, maybe there was actually a advert that came out for it, I might have to try find it on YouTube, where a man was talking about like something he'd done to a girl, and it basically implied that he'd raped her, and he was like, yeah, we shagged, like she was like, oh, I'm not really like too keen on the idea, blah blah blah. And the other guy was kind of just like sat there like, shit, like. Well, thank you for listening. If you have anything to comment, feel free. If you actually are a man and you want to react to this video, don't hesitate to get in touch with me. I am perfectly willing to do a video with you telling us how you feel. Yeah, thank you. Like and subscribe and share.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.